Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody. First trip to Cape Town. I hope soon to get out of the convention center and take in all the different mountaintops and everything. Well, thank you very much. We'll start off here just to kind of level set, just kind of this whole session, right? Is we've got basically TV and TV values in this kind of supernova as they're exploding and transitioning into the new digital world, which is still evolving. And we have this kind of, we're in the middle of this kind of value asymmetry between the two, where the increase in the ad spend in the internet keeps going up. Meanwhile, kind of the last frontier of broadcast values surround live sports globally. And that's also why the extreme increases in the values have gone up and up and up. We think, though, that that's starting to change. And you know, we get into this new world, and we've heard it almost a lot of every conference I've gone to in about 10 years of data is the new oil. Well, let's unpack that just a bit. And as I talk about data here, I promise I'm not going to use artificial intelligence. I'm not going to talk about machine learning. We're going to talk about narrative and stories. And what we need to understand, and what I think every one of these panelists have brought together here, is that the value of the industry of sport and of horse racing is the fan. That is what brings everything together. That's why we do what we do. And data is merely the traits of the fan at its simplest, and those are the then facts of the narrative. And so what the opportunity is now is that we can actually own that information and own that relationship in a way that we never have had. And so in that sense, that is what data becomes, which is a better connection to the composition of our fans. Now, if we look at, for a second, some of the pirates of Silicon Valley, these are those who have done best in monetizing data. And they view the world in an ARPU basis. And by the way, this is what's interesting here in your industry, which, you know, in other sports that I have, you know, getting over into ARPU concepts is a little more complex. Obviously, on one side, you have on the gambling and betting side, that's much easier. But here, let's take a sense of what they're doing with the data. And you know, they've done a great job, really, of siphoning out some of the engagement values that are from premium content holders and rights holders. You know, there's no secret in how YouTube started by basically unexplicitly pirating content and building up an audience and then selling it back to people. So what we've been doing at PumpJack is a lot of level setting different sports and teams in kind of the digital transformation process. Nobody starts at the same place. In every sport, there's different relationships in how data is shared between teams, between leagues, governing bodies, associations, between the fans, different laws and restrictions. But I think what's really holding everybody together right now is maybe confusion. What we see a lot is there's organizational confusion in trying to prioritize the first step in really moving forward into this new world order and really bringing the commercial value to hold and not just have tech and buy something new because somebody is out pitching it. But we want to understand why we're doing these sorts of things. So when we look at a given audience, let's think about measuring things that we might think are unmeasurable, like passion. Is passion reasonable? You might argue to a Liverpool fan, it's absolutely reasonable to be to have that kind of passion. And if we just look at that image, you know, what do we know? And how do we know it? And so one problem that we see in a lot of rights holders globally is just knowing the bowl, the actual venue, and knowing who those people are. And really, as from a data perspective, what only exists are the address, some of the information of the season ticket holder or the ticket holder. Increasingly, as that ticket has become digital, it opens up some things, such as understanding the transfer of those tickets. That's something we've done with Real Sociedad in La Liga, is the average ticket buyer will generally have about 3.4 tickets. So in the venue, historically, we've just known the one person, but not the other three. And so digital ticketing is one element to try to fill in this gap, or this ghost audience, if you will. There are many other ways to fill this in besides the digital ticket. The Wi-Fi connectivity, DAS, things coming off the 5G networks, camera technologies, and which can be a very interesting one. You know, and this again is, you might have more in your audience than you actually realize. You know, the diversity of the content that we've been talking about, that Ali was talking about earlier, the combination of the fashion with the sport, these sorts of things. We've talked a little bit about the increasing gender diversity. It might already be there. It might be in the numbers, actually. I'll give you an example. Major League Baseball is a growing, and some people will say a dying sport in the United States, because there's no youth coming up from the bottom. They believe that by some stats and some measure that the average age of attendance is 58 years old. That data comes a lot from some of this ticketing information, which is then paired with older survey data, such as Axiom, Experian, these kind of data companies that really are basing all of their statistics. There's nothing wrong with it, it's about accuracy, that come off of geographic census information. Now, one baseball club chose for a series of about 20 days to use a camera technology. It's actually from South Africa, called FanCam. And they were able to take a picture of the entire, high-resolution pictures throughout the game that were so high-res that you could then very quickly take basic facial recognition technology and get very detailed, 99% accuracy on the entire audience. What was interesting is that different content throughout the day, and you're thinking about what we've been talking about today with different innovations in content, different kinds of races. Well, how does that change the demographic? So in this case, in a baseball game, because you have many of these different days, they have different kinds of events. There's a Grateful Dead day. There was a bat night where they give a free bat. There's a kid's jersey. So with this camera technology, they're able to finally see an actual number. And it turns out it was closer to 37. And there was a higher, there were more kids there, actually. Because that was a hard place to get the children data, was actually hard to acquire otherwise. And so these are kinds of things that we can kind of think about when we're trying to think about what do we own, what are we sitting on, and are there things just right beneath us, personas that with just tying a few strings together on technology that we're already sitting on can change the game. So when we think of something like passion, which is not a metric like age or birthday, you know, how can we cobble that together? And there's many ways, but to do that, you've really got to cobble together a lot of different streams. You also have to have a concept which kind of came when we're talking about trying to holistically collect data, is a kind of a unique idea. You need to have a concept of one person, and trying to stitch that together and then follow that person over time is what becomes very difficult. The complexity only increases. I was talking to an NBA team 2 weeks ago, has 78 different software vendors. So there's just trying to keep all those contracts in order, it's hard enough. But then understanding if you're trying to track one person across those different things, did they engage in 32 out of the 76? 73 out of the 76? Which data points are duplicated? These are some of the different complexities, and these things are only growing every day. There are only more technologies coming out. This is what is going to happen when 5G and these kinds of things we talked about this morning, it is going to be a fire hose. You need to start preparing to filter this and to commercialize it so that you can be a leader and start investing in those kind of infrastructure components and also the other fan engagement components that come out of that, and to stay ahead. But you've got to really get a sense of the return, the financial and commercial return of data. And I think people too often think of it as a cost basis. What we see in the States and to a lesser extent in some Europe, when people are doing data right now in sport, most of it is on the transactional side. Generally, this is ticketing. People have some good models on advancing, predicting churn rates for season ticket holders or members, maybe a little bit on the merchandise. But what's getting a little bit less connected is understanding that as grist to the mill of the overall demography and the interest graph, if you will. If you think about what asset does Facebook have, it is that interest graph. It is the idea that Mark Zuckerberg can take to market the Venn diagram of Budweiser with, let's say, Dallas Mavericks, and that digital purchase he's owning right now. The irony is Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, actually has better data because he knows when Budweiser is being sold in his stadium and also which brands. But that data hasn't been able to be connected to create a marketplace yet. So, and then, of course, then I have, or in the Mavericks case, all the demographics associated with those different pieces to tell you demographic differences and trends between Bud Light, Budweiser, and Stella, and maybe this new Mexican beer that just came out. And so it's with understanding and getting these things connected that you can actually create the personas, or you can discover personas that are within the stories of your whole umbra of fan engagement. And so just to give kind of a sense of this, or just some examples, this was just showing a map on devices, I think that came up earlier today. This is kind of backing up to the sense of the Dallas-Fort Worth area of 8 million on a game day and watching devices. This actually helped to change strategies and win a partnership with the mass transit system. But you can also see how this could scale down to a race course. You could heat map the race course. We can watch people moving. We can then filter that by different things. Who's ticketed, who's not, male, female. Certain punter levels. Maybe we start to try to, and now we can start to do other things through maybe the mobile app, if it's connected, to direct people into new places that we're trying to engender further engagement. When you have this kind of thing, this kind of fan profile, this is another thing I urge people to think about, which is, if you have a fan database and you have a fan profile, consider what are the absolute minimum attributes you wish to connect to every person. It might just be 5 at the beginning, i.e. birthday, gender, maybe a certain amount of bets they've made, and a certain amount of total revenue. You can bring these things together. That's how you know if you're growing value in a database. I mean, it's obvious if you can just grow in number, but we're moving into a world where we can take advantage that numbers, sure, impressions are important. That's always going to be the case. We're always going to want full attendance. But increasingly, we have the opportunity to tell better stories about who is there, and also then match our partners with the right people, and also bring new personas to new partners that we might not even have considered yet. And this is where I think starts to break things open, where it's just beyond kind of a passive opportunity, and more where you are a rights holder as matchmaker to sponsor and fan on things that they mutually care about. And it's that mutual part that's so worthwhile and is effectively the interest graph between two. The other kind of thing then is really trying to get data to flow inside of an organization so that people who aren't data scientists can ask simple questions just as you do to Google and things come up. It's kind of called a fan index, if you will. And then kind of just finally to talk about where things can go is really thinking about what's the value. We understand maybe a cost, but to understand the value, maybe I'll put it this way. I was speaking to an English Premier League team that had about 65 million fans on Facebook. And they were talking about how they've just had 1 million downloads of their club app, which, bravo. But the question I asked was, if I could snap my fingers and give you 20 million fans on that app tomorrow at 9 a.m., would you pay 40 million pounds for it? And if you don't have a concept of the ARPU and the return of investment and a concept of how I'm going to commercialize the whole digital platform, it makes it more difficult to answer that. And that is the goal that you need to try to get to understand the value of what you're creating, so then you can stand up to sponsors and be strong in understanding the value of the unique audiences that you have and the unique experiences that you provide with the great content that exists. And finally, I'll just leave with this kind of concept of exchange. Exchanging this is what I think is going to get really interesting as technologies improve to keep things set with privacy and tokenization and these sorts of things. But really, it's how do we share data with our partners? How could we go to, from our side to Longines, who's come up and said, here, before you had your sponsorship, here was the timepiece market, and here's what they look like, and you started here. Now, after a year, here's where it's lifted on both sides. Or a sponsor comes and says, I wish to find more travelers. What do you have right now? How is it different? Here's what I'm looking for. Let me plug my data into you. The idea that GM might want to go to Manchester United soon and say, we want this exact section of China. Can you deliver that right now? We'll give you some signal for that. What content can you send to that signal to increase engagement? These are the kinds of things that I think we're not far away from. The technology is there. I think pressures, potentially macro, could accelerate these things as brands look for less risk in their portfolios over time. And so I'll leave you just a few kind of key points on trying to kind of establish this, this kind of new thinking in the organization. I think what I've heard today, and it seems from Winfred and everything else, is big visions is always great. Small steps to those are important. Important to have agility, and this is a thing too with the new technologies that are an advantage. Is there are more and more bigger tech things that I built 6 years ago for 3 years are now things that are basically free, and that kind of model increases. So things that would have been maybe 3-year projects can be done at much lower cost and at much higher speed. That's just the technology pulse. What is the commercial narrative? If that is not aligned and considered with the data and the technology, I think you got it out of whack. Those two have to be in harmony, and I think that's definitely something that organizations are skipping mostly, is really setting out, we have X commercial goal that needs this data to optimize and improve. And I think when you get those things and ask those business questions into the technology, you get good results as a whole. And I'll leave you there. I thank you very much for the time and look forward to the Q&A.